President.
Dr. John.
Deputy President. Thanks, Linda.
Mr.
Deputy President, I rise on behalf of the Greens to address the Election Funding, Expenditure and Disclosure Amendments Bill 2014, and I congratulate the previous member on her contribution and the way in which I think she really nailed some of the key issues around this legislation. Let's be absolutely clear, Mr. Deputy President, New South Wales is in a crisis of public confidence. Our political system has been brought low by the behaviour of individuals both within the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. We are before this House debating legislation specifically because the Liberal Party has been caught by allegations before ICAC engaged in systematically rorting the electoral funding system. And to be absolutely an electoral donation system, to be absolutely clear, Mr. Deputy President, what was true of Labor was that a number of their senior members have been found to have behaved corruptly by ICAC, spectacularly corrupt. But no allegation was made against the core of the Labor Party as there has been against the core of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party's chief fundraiser has stood aside not only from his job as the Liberal Party's chief fundraiser, but also from his job with the Australian Hotels Association. Liberal Party secretary has gone, a Liberal Party premier has gone, 2 Liberal Party ministers have gone, and 8 backbenchers have had to stand aside. It is a crisis of public confidence in the party of government, and this legislation was supposed to restore public confidence in the political process. Mr. President, as a member of the Greens and as a member of a party that has been campaigning on clean politics issues for a decade and a half, it gives me no pleasure to recite the litany of what has befallen the Liberal Party, because it is not just the Liberal Party that suffers. It is not just the Labor Party that suffers because of Eddie Obeid and Ian MacDonald. It is the entire democratic process that is brought low by the behaviour of those who seek to use politics to enrich themselves or empower themselves against the laws and against the right and proper behaviour of a person in public office. So what is the response of the Baird government to the crisis? The crisis that comes about because people within the Liberal Party have had evidence before ICAC of extremely adverse behaviour with respect to campaign donations. What is their response? To bring forward a bill that puts the hands of the political parties even deeper into the till, that creates even greater centralisation of political power into the hands of the party operatives that brought down the Liberal Party's reputation, to increasingly centralise the power that comes with money into smaller hands, into fewer and fewer hands, and create the corporate political parties that are increasingly divorced of their grassroots. Mr. Deputy President, this is not a bill that will in any way restore confidence. This is a bill that will do nothing but create a sense of despair amongst the voters that politicians of all stripes cannot be trusted. Cannot be trusted to run their own political system. And maybe there's something in that. Maybe we shouldn't be trusted to run our own political system. But we are, and this legislation is before us today, and this legislation is being brought in after the beginning of the election funding system. 21 days ago, the capped electoral spending system was introduced. What will this legislation do in practice for the 2015 election? As written, it will increase the funding available to the New South Wales Liberal Party and their candidates from the amount they received at the last election, $8.123 million, if their vote doesn't change, to $14.25 million. That's a 50% increase, more than a 50% increase in the amount of money that they can take from the public purse if their vote remains the same. One presumes that the Liberals and Nationals vote will go down. It's more likely they'll get $12.8 million between them in their upper house and their candidates. $12.8 million under this system, the effectively $7 per vote for the major parties, compared to $8.123 million. Now, what's the other big difference, of course, is to get the $8.123 million or $8.1 million that the Liberals and Nationals spend in the 2011 election, they had to raise $4.8 million under the existing, I should say, funding system. Under this funding system, all they have to do is raise loans of $12.8 million. They don't have to raise a single donation. The Liberal Party and National Party are asset rich. They can borrow that money. The Labor Party is asset rich. They can borrow that money. This legislation has built into it an inherent bias against parties that don't have assets. And that raises the question, where did the assets of the Labor Party and where did the assets of the Liberals and Nationals come from? But from donations in the past, massive donations in the past, donations that we now understand to have a corrupting influence on the political process. Mr Deputy President, that $12.8 million will cost the Liberal and National parties absolutely nothing whatsoever. It will be for free. All they need to do is raise the money and they get it all back. It is a huge gift. And how will the people of New South Wales view a political party that goes from $8.123 million in public funding to $12.8 million? And they will say this, Mr Deputy President, they will say, well, we have just rewarded the party miscreants. We have just rewarded those who put their hands into the till with an additional $4 million in public funding. $4 million that comes from a government that says that they can't afford to run a TAFE system, they can't afford to fund a public education system, they can't afford to pay public servants a decent wage, they can't afford to invest in public hospitals, they have to hand it over to the private sector. Yet they can find $4 million for their own coffers. Similar figures for the Labor Party, and but all political parties, all the large political parties will see an increase. This, not content. The Baird government, not content with the idea that they're going to massively increase the amount of money they get, they are also intent on slashing the amount of money that unions and other third parties can spend by a factor of 4, from more than a factor of 4, from $1.1 million to $250,000. Now, I'm really interested in this bill. This bill has caused a lot of debate in the media. It's caused a lot of debate in political parties. It's caused a lot of discussion between political parties. Some of it very useful debate and discussion. But the thing is, I can't find anywhere where anybody has said to me that as a response to ICAC we should do something about third parties. Can somebody show me where the union movement was engaged in the sort of corrupt behaviour that was exposed before ICAC? Can somebody show me where the union movement or any other third party, where Get Up or any other, or even the Minerals Council, or even the Minerals Council or the Business Chamber of New South Wales, where were they involved in corruption that traduced the laws, the funding laws in New South Wales? Nowhere. Yet Premier Baird and his funding laws, Premier Baird and his funding laws do nothing. Premier Baird and his funding laws are designed specifically to silence membership-based third-party campaigners from having their say in this election campaign. And we'll have a lot more to say about that, I have no doubt, when it comes to the committee stage. I've spoken already about the centralisation of funds, the fact that all of the money in this bill is stripped out of the candidates and put in the hands of political parties. In the hands of political parties, now in my party, I have absolutely no doubt that my party's governing body will instantaneously turn, if this legislation goes through unamended, will turn around and hand that money back to candidates. And I have no doubt other parties, no doubt, might do the same thing, although I think in the case of the National Party and the deeply centrist kind of leadership that we've seen in here, that responds much more to the ideas of command and control within their own party, particularly the government leader, particularly the leader of the government, whose only intellectual contribution ever seems to go to some kind of weird connection to North Korea, and maybe he's got a special fixation on North Korea, I don't know. But Mr President, the centralisation, our concern is not about our own party. We will hand that money back. Our concern is about the impact on your party, Mr President, and on the party, the leader of the government, the National Party, and on the party of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Labor Party. None of those parties need more centralisation, and New South Wales does not need political parties that are increasingly centralised and increasingly under control. I actually don't give a toss about your party, Duncan. I care about the future of politics in New South Wales. I care about the outcomes for New South Wales, Mr President. I care about a state in which increasingly their political elite have their control on the money and the power and shut out the grassroots. It is critical that we not allow that happen. Mr Deputy President, we were told by the government, oh, there are reductions in caps. It's a great thing. The reductions in caps are purely the inflation over the last 4 years. And as I've said time and again, real cuts, real cuts, terrific, real cuts. If we were living in Germany in 1928 in a period of hyperinflation, it would be real cuts. But there are no real cuts in this. There's been hardly any inflation. It is a desalutary reduction in the caps. It is almost no reduction at all. It is a show pony reduction that will have no effect on party spending whatsoever. It makes no sense. Now, I have to say, there are three good things in this legislation. The anti-avoidance measures in this legislation, which are very similar to those proposed by my colleague in the lower house, Jamie Parker, one of the real voices for clean politics in New South Wales. That anti-avoidance measures are very good. The penalties are a step in the right direction. You could argue about the quanta, but they are a step in the right direction. And I have to say, and this is an admission from me, I have to say I think there is good sense behind moving away from the existing model, which does encourage fundraising, to a model which is less dependent on fundraising. And I was one of the primogenitors of the existing model. I did so, I think all people involved in developing that model did so with a sense of this was the right thing to do, was to create a fairer and more level playing field in politics. I think in the end it probably did engage more fundraising than was healthy for our society. Mr Deputy President, if the Liberal Party and Premier Mike Baird were serious about reducing corruption and the corruption pull of the existing model, they would have had serious cuts to the caps. They would have had serious cuts to donations, serious limits on donations. We are proposing those, Mr Deputy President. Mr President, we will be proposing those. We are proposing those in the amendments. There is a more complex and nuanced argument to be had about third parties. I think if we were to reduce...
Order!
You know, Mr President, if I may say, I really don't...
Order! I know the honourable member has been considerably provoked, but I would just suggest that he continue with his remarks.
Thank you, Mr President. That's sage advice and I will follow it. Mr President, Mr President, if this government had been serious, they would have cut the caps on spending and they would have cut the donation limits, but they would have also had a serious conversation about how we engage with third parties, not at the death knell before the election, not in a punitive way that was deliberately designed to silence the teachers, the nurses and the electrical trades union in the lead up to an election, where everybody knew they were going to spend up big on policy issues that did not work for this government. On the issues of electricity privatisation of the wires and poles, on the issue of the disgraceful attack on TAFE, and on the issue of the privatisation of public hospitals, and on the issue of nurse-patient ratios, the government knew they were vulnerable to third-party spending and they did not want it to happen, so they said, OK, behind the cover of ICAC, let's cut that. Now, there may be a case for reducing the amount of money spent by third parties in an environment in which the amount of money being given to political parties was to be reduced. But it's not. It's being increased, in the case of the Liberal Party, by 50%. So how can you justify giving the Liberal Party a 50% increase while you cut teachers, nurses and the electrical trades union by 75%? The calculus there can only point in one direction, and that direction takes us straight to the High Court. The caps, as were proposed by this legislation on third parties, was not only unjustifiable, was not only out of all proportion to the increase given to the political parties are about to give themselves, but it was also It was also an attack on the freedom of political communication and would have seen the whole edifice, in a very messy outcome, end up in the High Court, with the possibility of the whole edifice falling down and complete chaos. And it is not the way to go, and it is clearly a political manoeuvre from the Baird government. Let us, after this election is over, let us have a discussion, a mature discussion, about how we stop the political action committees, the PACs in America, from forming. There are real questions about regulating third parties, serious questions. I'm on record in an upper house inquiry which I chaired and in this chamber saying that we should take a very good look at caps which are based on the number of members, and we should be favouring the rights of membership-based organisations to spend in elections. But we should not be silencing voices in this election. The High Court won't tolerate it, our voters won't tolerate it. I tell you, Mr President, the Greens won't tolerate that kind of behaviour. Mr President, there are real clean-up things that can be done in this election. My colleague Jamie Parker introduced a bill into the lower house that did reduce the amount of money being spent in politics, both by third parties and by political parties. His bill was a roadmap as to how we can clean up politics. The legislation before the chamber today sees a massive increase in the amount of money that political parties will be able to spend. It sees a substantial reduction in decentralisation, a substantial increase in the amount of centralisation of the funds and the power in political parties. It sees almost nothing happen that is meaningful on disclosures or meaningful on reducing cuts. It is not a step in the right direction. Mr President, we will not be voting against this legislation at the second read. However, Mr President, what we will do is we'll be moving a number of amendments during the committee stage. We believe there are some good features in this legislation. In fact, there are some points which are extremely important. However, we believe that this legislation can be substantially improved in the third read, in the committee stage, and we'll be working to that event.